Dream of a Lost Friend by Carol Ann Duffy. So at first appearance this looks like the very worst kind of poetry, deeply personal. It's like being caught with a stranger on a train who insists on telling you about last night's dream. Nothing could be worse. And I must admit I approached this in a rather negative frame of mind. But Carol Ann Duffy's not stupid, and my reading of her poetry is that she always strives to be universal. She's always trying to tell a story that we all recognise. And this is a story that has become increasingly real the older I've got, and the same's going to happen to you. The longer you live, the more of your friends and your relatives die. And it's partly about how she responds, and certainly how I respond to death. And so actually, this poem has quite a personal meaning for me. So dream of a lost friend. You were dead, but we met dreaming before you had died. And I'm really interested in this idea of dreaming. It's as though the friend is also dreaming of the future self. I'll still be here when I'm dead, you'll still be remembering me. And there is that kind of hope, isn't it, that once we're gone, we'll still be remembered. And particularly if we don't have a religious faith, this is the only way we're going to live on. And then these italics really strike me. My dear, must this be? And who's speaking? Is this, my dear, the person who's dying, or is it the poet herself? And I choose to look at this as the poet for this reason, this idea of the AIDS poster. And I think she's placed the AIDS poster here to give us a clue as to the reason that this friend is dying. It feels firmly rooted in the AIDS epidemic as we thought it was going to be in the 80s and 90s. And the use of the word dear also suggests that this might well be someone who's unlucky enough to contract AIDS through a homosexual relationship. And obviously we all know that 50% of AIDS victims are heterosexual, but certainly in the earlier days this wasn't the case. And then we've got this ambiguity here, help me. And who's trapped here? Is it the friend who's dying, or is it the observer? Is it the poet watching someone die and simply not knowing how to deal with it? And that's the interpretation that I think I probably favour. And then we've got this final thing here, your white lips, clearly unnatural, clearly ill, clearly dying, but also a vision of surrender. This person is giving up, they know there's no hope. Then in the second stanza, we're in a long corridor, it's reminiscent of a hospital, which harboured a fierce pain neither of us felt yet, and there's this idea of thinking forward to that future. We don't know how we're going to feel when we're dying, and Duffy doesn't yet know, but also we don't know how we're going to react to death. If we go back 150 years, death is very common. Many of your children would die before they were 10, and there was a ritual and a routine almost of knowing how to deal with death, and it's something that in our society we've largely lost. You may well never have seen somebody die until you're over 30 in our society. And this is very recent, very new, and this poem I think is partly about not knowing how to deal with that. The words you spoke were frenzied prayers, and this adjective that the prayers are frenzied I think shows that confusion. How on earth do we deal with death? What do we do in a society that no longer believes in God? And here the enjambment leads us to expect a prayer to God, but no. The prayer is to chemistry, the cocktail of drugs that doctors continue to use to try and save us, and nowhere is that more true than with AIDS, where a huge number of drugs have been tried. Or you laughed, a child man's laugh, innocent, and this idea of innocence is picked up from the earlier white lips, which also symbolised innocence, but also hysterical, out of your skull. And suddenly this person who's dying has been dehumanised. And of course another way of being out of your skull literally would be dead. It's only a dream, I heard myself saying, only a bad dream. And the italics again are quite interesting. When is she saying this? Is it to the person who's dying? Is this a remembered memory? Or is it just in the dream? And is she telling herself, look, you're going to wake up soon, this death is only a dream, and when you wake up you won't have to face that death anymore. And this is deeply ironic because obviously the friend is actually dead. In her waking hours she's able to forget about this, but in her dream she keeps returning to it. And perhaps there's an element of guilt here, which we'll find out in a minute. Some of our best friends nurture a virus, and so this, taken literally, is again, I think, a reference to the AIDS virus, an idle, charmed, purposeful enemy. And if you're old enough to have lived through the onset of AIDS, you'll know that at its beginning, we were convinced that this was going to be an incurable epidemic, and that it was going to kill billions of people. We didn't expect, I know this sounds ridiculous given how many people have died, but so few people to die. It was something that was going to grow exponentially, and there's this idea that it's charmed. This was a virus that somehow, whatever we did, we couldn't defeat. And so that's one way of looking at this. But another, of course, what is a metaphorical one. What is this virus? Well, the virus is the dream. It dreams they are dead already. And so this dream herself that Duffy is having is a virus that her dead friend has spread. And this isn't the AIDS virus. It's a virus about memory, it's about guilt, and it's about knowing how on earth we deal with the death of our loved ones. And it haunts her in her dreams. In fashionable restaurants over the crudités, the healthy imagine a time when all these careful moments will be dreamed and dreamed again. And so she comes back to this idea of how we imagine we'll be remembered in the future. The healthy, people like us, we know we're going to live quite a long time, at least we hope we do. But even so, when somebody dies, we keep wondering how we'll be remembered. And we focus on that. You look well. How do you feel? But these are platitudes. Then, as I slept, you backed away from me, crying and offering a series of dates for lunch, waving. It's as though the person dying, backing away, realises that Duffy, the observer, cannot fully understand what's happening, can't accept it, doesn't know how to deal with it. And a future life is reduced to this, dates for lunch. Here in the last verse, the italics again leap out at us. I missed your funeral. And this is a bit of a euphemism, isn't it? It doesn't say why she missed the funeral. And I think she's struggling to admit that she's done it on purpose. But wants us to realise that, but actually at the same time doesn't want to face it. So this again is survivor's guilt. Knowing you couldn't hear at the end of the corridor, thumbs up, acting. And she hasn't been able to join in with this acting, this pretending that her friend is still going to live while he was alive, or she was alive, but is actually about to die. Where there's life, the ellipsis here is ironic, isn't it? Where there's life, there's hope is the expression, but obviously here there's no hope, because in the dream she already knows that her friend is dead, because the dream is happening after her friend has died. Awake, alive for months, I think of you, almost hopeful. And there's the reference to hope again ironic, in a bad dream where you were long dead. And there's this double meaning again. She's dreaming now after the person has already been long dead, but also when that person was alive, that person was acting. It was all a fantasy, it was all a dream. Awake and alive for months, just waiting for death. And it's that idea of the charmed virus slowly killing you from the inside. The tone of the poem is quite interesting. It's almost conversational. Again, as typical of Duffy, you could rearrange this poem as prose, and I wonder how much it would lose in that layout. I think what it would lose is the ambiguity of who's speaking. And that's important to her, because this poem is all about ambiguity. How do I really feel? How should I really respond? I'm not sure. And that's the uncertainty of the voice of the poet, I feel. And what anchors that uncertainty are these constant pairings of dead and dreaming. So hope and hopelessness. And every time dreaming appears, there's death. And then we go on to the next verse, and we'll see the same. There's dreams, and it's immediately followed by dead, and it's a pattern she keeps repeating. Dead, dream. And she's emphasising it continually, because that's the centre of the poem. Is life a dream, something we're just acting in, just performing, that's leading us towards death? Reminded of Prospero's words in The Tempest. Or is it something that's always worth living, where there's life? Cling on to it as desperately as you can, despite the fact that it's brief, despite the fact that it ends, despite the fact that you can look at it as an illusion. And then the final verse is also, I think, a desperate clinging on to life. Look at the way these verbs end in ing. Crying, offering, knowing, acting. And there's this idea that life is clinging on, waving. It's still going on. It's an action in the past, but it's not completed. And it's only completed in the dream, with the final word, with death. And you might say, okay, well, the final word is death, and that's what she's getting at. The end of everything is death, and that makes everything else pointless. Or you can flip that around and look at it the other way. Because we know that's what the final end is death, we've got to keep struggling. You know, all these verbs are instructions to us. Keep going. Do everything in the face of death. But don't deny it. And that takes us back to this, which I think is her guilt in the end. I missed your funeral, and I shouldn't have done. I should have been brave enough to face it, and I should have been brave enough to face your death where you were still alive. And certainly that's a personal message that I've had to learn, and a painful one. So, I hope you enjoyed that poem. Good luck with your studies.